Okay, so basically wanted to just kind of give an overview of what Fiddler is and what Fiddler Core is and what you can do with these and look for opportunities for us to use Fiddler and Fiddler Core to make the BravePoint experience and the overall progress experience a little bit better. Um, Fiddler is the world's most popular general purpose debugging platform for web content. It works across all browsers, and so unlike the developer tools inside browsers, you can use it with any browser. So I can debug Chrome, Opera, Safari, Firefox, Internet Explorer, and so forth. It works cross-platform to a certain extent, and so you can run it on Linux. It's available for Mac, but unfortunately the Mac port is not very good, and that's something that we're looking at. But an important caveat there is that the Mac port of Fiddler is not that great. The Mac port of Fiddler Core, which is the underlying proxy engine that allows Fiddler's power and is something that we might want to integrate into future Progress offerings, actually works fine on Mac. And so the problem is the UI, and so we'll talk about that a little bit briefly. Fiddler was acquired by Telerik in 2012. So prior to that, I was a program manager on the Internet Explorer team at Microsoft, and so I worked at Microsoft for about a decade. And Fiddler was a side project that kind of got out of hand and acquired millions of users. Fiddler's free, and so we give Fiddler out for free, mostly as a way to both drive goodwill in community and get attention for Telerik's product offerings. A lot of the people that are downloading Fiddler are the sorts of people that we would like to come to Telerik and find the other products that we make. Fiddler Core, however, is not free, generally speaking. We're currently revising the licensing around that, but Fiddler Core is basically a C# class library that provides the core functionality of Fiddler Core of Fiddler. And so what that means is that in your .NET application, you can get all of the HTTP and HTTPS requests made by the machine. You can view those requests, you can modify those requests, you can get their responses, you can modify the responses. And so basically you can build a Fiddler-like application without any of the Fiddler UI. There's a number of scenarios in which this is useful. We'll talk about that in a bit. Right now, the licensing is going under revision. Originally, it was, I gave it out when I worked for Microsoft. It was free. Once I joined Telerik, it became a commercial offering. And so for the first couple of years, we had an open source license and a commercial license. Now we're going to probably revise that so that there will be two levels of commercial license, people who are building things internally and then people who are building things for external distribution. And so we'll explore that in a bit. What do people use Fiddler and Fiddler Core for? They use it for debugging their websites, primarily, websites and web services. And so if you want to find out what's going on between your client and your website or your web service or a third-party website and web service, you typically would just start Fiddler, start your application, and then look to see what's going wrong. In a lot of cases, just looking at what's going on immediately shows, oh, well, the reason that this is failing is because the endpoint isn't responding, or, hey, that DNS lookup failed, or, hey, the web service is returning a 500, and look, there's an exception message that we can go read. People will use it for things like security testing and performance testing, and so there are entire classes of users who don't use Fiddler for general purpose web debugging. They're a security professional, and they're going to go do a penetration test against a website. Or they're a performance tester, and they want to understand how can we make our pages faster, and so they can use Fiddler with some specialized plugins that will automatically find problems related to security or performance. And so, again, the notion is do as much as possible for the user. But it's not a sort of a run-and-done solution. It's not generally going to automatically fix anything for you. What it's going to do is draw your attention to problems that you're having. Where Fiddler and Fiddler Core becomes super interesting from a support perspective is in reproducing problems. One of the key features around Fiddler is its ability to capture traffic and store it for later examination, and then potentially even replay that traffic. And so a great scenario here is We have Test Studio, which is a product that we use for doing functional testing and load testing of websites. And occasionally a customer will report, hey, I'm trying to use Test Studio to test my website, but I'm getting an error. And the error, we'll go look at the error, and it's like, element not found or something like that. And so what we do is we get the user to run Fiddler or a related tool called FiddlerCap that captures a traffic log of all of the traffic between the client and the server on that user's machine. And this is necessary because most of the time these users are not testing public websites. They're testing things behind their firewall that we ourselves cannot see. So they collect this traffic capture into a format called SAS, the Session Archive Zip, which is basically just a zip file containing all of the requests and responses. And then they send that file to us. We can open that file in Fiddler and view the traffic as it was seen on their machine. More importantly, what we can do is there's a feature in Fiddler called the autoresponder. And what the autoresponder does is it takes a capture file and allows you to basically play it back. And so I can take something that was recorded on your network, I can load it into Fiddler's autoresponder on my network, and then I can hit URLs that don't exist on my network. Fiddler will basically play back the responses. So if I request, HTTP IBM payroll, it will find that request in its capture, and then it will send it back to the client. And so I can effectively reproduce problems that occurred only on your network on my network. And so this is one of the core scenarios for both Fiddler and people that are building things atop Fiddler core is the capture of problems. And so some of the web testing frameworks that people have built integrate Fiddler core for the purpose of collecting log files for their support teams to analyze. So this traffic debugging sort of pattern has become quite widespread in certain companies. And so, for instance, if you work on the Office team at Microsoft, the development team does not accept any bugs from the test team that don't include traffic captures. And the reason for that is, well, the infrastructure is changing all the time, the client may have had a bad configuration, and so forth. And the traffic capture file, the SAZ file, effectively becomes the ultimate truth of what was seen. You can also use Fiddler core in things like building automated testing frameworks. And so if you want to go out and hit your website and navigate around your website and do things on an automatic basis, you can use Fiddler to capture that. And so on the Office team building the Office web applications at Microsoft, what they do is they run their automated tests with FiddlerCap running. And if there's any test that fails, they basically automatically file a bug and they attach the traffic capture that was automatically generated in order to allow that reproduction. Now, there's obviously hundreds of more scenarios, and so for Fiddler core external customers, the scenarios are pretty broad. We see things like people trying to build parental controls, people that are trying to build auditing, and so, for instance, there's a law firm somewhere where, back in the days when a law firm was working on a case, every time the lawyer made a copy, they swiped their card on the Xerox machine, and then it billed the customer effectively like a dime for the copy, right? Well, customers, eventually the law firms moved away from doing physical copies, and they started doing electronic copies. But the lawyers really wanted to continue to get paid those little nickel and dime fees. And so there was a law firm that used Fiddler core, and they basically put a client on all their lawyers' machines. And anytime the lawyer would pull up a document from SharePoint, it would effectively bill the appropriate customer like a quarter. And so, it was generating this audit log of, hey, this user pulled, this document from our CRM. It was related to your case, and we're going to bill you for that. And so there's, a huge variety of scenarios. Some of them ridiculous, and some of them fairly reasonable that Fiddler core gets used for. Our overall positioning is we want to make the world's most useful platform for debugging any website or service. And more importantly than that, we really wanted to make it the standard tool for web development professionals. And the reasoning there is effectively, we want everybody to be thinking of Fiddler kind of as their first choice or their common choice. So if I'm interacting with someone on a test team that I haven't interacted with before, I want them to think first, oh, well, I'll send them a Fiddler capture, and maybe if they want to do something different, then maybe they can do that. But the general idea is we want everybody to be be using this. And our efforts here have been interesting. We have a huge variety of users. We have a very large number of users, but there's plenty of opportunity for growth. And a lot of this comes from the fact that we've never spent any money marketing Fiddler. We don't, bundle it very much right now. And our awareness driving has mostly been related to, me going to conferences and talking about it and whatnot. Our positioning in terms of getting customers to license Fiddler Core is that it's got proven reliability and it's extremely extensible. And so, there are a variety of companies that make these HTTP interception libraries. None of them has a user base nearly as broad as Fiddler and Fiddler Core. And so people that are licensing Fiddler Core, when they see the cost and say, well, geez, that's kind of a lot of money, why should we pick your solution? Our response is, well, we've got, 2 million people or whatever that are using Fiddler, and it's been in the market for 12 years now. And so, all those bugs that you're going to uncover if you try and write your own or if you try and license some third-party thing that's not getting used very broadly, we've already found those and fixed them. The programming model for Fiddler Core is, effectively simple things are easy, complex things are possible. And so if you just want to log the traffic, it's trivial to do. You can do it in a couple of lines of code. If you want to do something much more elaborate, like low-level packet timings, it's possible to do those things, although more code is required. It runs on essentially every version of Windows. It runs on XP. It runs on Vista, Win 7, Win 8, Win 8.1, Windows 10. It runs on Linux. Both the Fiddler and Fiddler Core run on Linux, and Mac. It kind of runs on Mac. The Fiddler Core stuff works fine. The UI is not great. We would like to do more. More importantly, though, because Fiddler is a proxy, it's a proxy server that just basically has a UI attached to it and a lot of features attached to it. Anything that supports a proxy can use Fiddler Core or Fiddler. And so what this means is your iPads, your Windows Phone, your Android devices, you can run Fiddler on your Linux machine or your virtual machine or your Windows PC and point your device's proxy settings at Fiddler. And then you can debug traffic from that device. So you don't have to jailbreak your device and then try and use some tiny little ridiculous UI on the device itself. You can basically pair your PC running Fiddler with any of your devices and debug their traffic. And so this is a pretty important scenario for us. And the last thing is that it's just broadly useful. And so anything that you're trying to do from a test perspective, anything that you're trying to do from a traffic capture perspective, anything you're trying to do from a traffic rewrite perspective. So one of our biggest users of Fiddler Core right now, for instance, is there's a company called Browsium. And what Browsium's product does is it allows you to use your Internet Explorer 6 targeted intranet sites on Windows 8.1 running IE11. So ordinarily, Windows 8.1 running IE11, if you try and open a site that only runs in IE6, it's just going to fall all over itself trying to work. So,
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Yeah. So we do a lot of our testing with Firebug. How would you compare Fiddler to Firebug? I mean, is that a reasonable comparison, or are they?
It is a somewhat reasonable comparison. So the difference effectively is that you can think of Firebug as a browser debugger that has two major modes. One mode is interacting with the DOM, so the document object model of the page, and one mode is interacting with the requests that are made, so the network tab of Firebug. And so Fiddler is more akin to an extraordinarily turbocharged version of the network tab of Firebug.
Okay.
So you can do things that the Firebug network tab cannot do. But it's really more targeted toward that rather than, so for instance, Fiddler has no particular knowledge of the DOM. If you want to do something with the DOM in Fiddler, you effectively have to parse the HTML yourself and then run it in a web control and things like that. And so sometimes people use it for paired scenarios. But one of the fun examples of one of the things that people do with Fiddler that is kind of amusing is, so there's a thing called Firebug Lite, right? So rather than a Firefox extension, it's an in-browser JavaScript-based version of Firefox. And so you've got a lot of devices running, ancient versions. So you've got like Internet Explorer 6 on Windows XP, which for all intents and purposes didn't have any developer tools. Well, you can run Firebug Lite in Internet Explorer 6 on Windows XP. But in order to run Firebug Lite, you have to modify the HTML to reference that JavaScript file so that it pulls it in. Well, this is one of the tasks you can do with Fiddler. And
Okay.
so there's a set of people that basically just have rules in Fiddler that, when they're debugging on ancient clients or whatever, that go inject Firebug Lite in every page that that application requests so that they can use the Firebug style debugger inside those tools without actually modifying the source code on the server, which they may or may not control. And so it's more of a peer to something like Firebug or the F12 tools in IE. Scenarios that are going on in the network tab, you can do in Fiddler, and often there's more power. So you can do things like content replacement in very complicated ways using rules that you specify. You can do things around, HTTPS and changing the way certificates work and so forth. So power that's not available in Firebug, but it is more toward the network side. And if you want to do things in the DOM, typically what you're going to end up doing is you're going to inject something in JavaScript that goes and manipulates that DOM. One of the good examples of that is the IE team built a tool called Compat Inspector. And what Compat Inspector is it's a JavaScript program that runs on the current web page and finds places where compatibility may be impacted. So like you've got an old version of jQuery that's not compatible with the latest version of IE. Well, they use a Fiddler plugin that injects Compat Inspector into every page loaded, and then they just test that way. And so if you've got any kind of automated testing JavaScript or whatever, you can use Fiddler or Fiddlercore for that. In terms of our downloads, it is, I believe, the most popular product that Telerik makes. It is not generating a ton of revenue because we're giving Fiddler away, and Fiddlercore licensing is something that we haven't really focused much attention on in the past, but I think Dan's going to talk about how we might change that. But certainly it's super popular. And, at Microsoft, when I left, there were 35,000 people at Microsoft that were using Fiddler, which is kind of ridiculous, because then that effectively 1 in 3 people at Microsoft, regardless of their title, were using Fiddler. Demo stuff. So have you guys used Fiddler at all? Have you seen it?
No. Not some of us.
Okay, so basically Fiddler, I've got all sorts of plugins and whatnot in my Fiddler, so it's a little more customized and tricked out than you might see otherwise. But effectively, my model for Fiddler was Outlook. On the left-hand side, and this is Outlook circa 2003. On the left-hand side, you've got a list of messages, and on the right-hand side, you've got a set of things to inspect those messages. And so you'll see things that are the request is on the top and the response is on the bottom. You'll notice that Fiddler has a ton of tabs, and so this is one of the sort of jokes around Fiddler's UI is that you've got tabs inside of tabs and potentially even tabs inside of that. And the key thing about Fiddler's UI is that virtually everything in here is extensible. The vast majority of these tabs are actually coming from plugins. These tabs here are all coming from plugins. These tabs here are all coming from plugins. And so you can actually customize Fiddler very, very closely to your particular target scenario. And so if you've got, for instance, some application that's built on the HTTP protocol. So a great example is RavenDB. RavenDB is one of those NoSQL databases, and their communication protocol between the database and the front end is HTTP. I think they use JSON. And somebody asked them, that's an odd choice. Why did you do that? And the answer was, because we can debug it with Fiddler. And they can actually build custom inspectors that inspect their traffic and show their traffic in the way that's meaningful to them. And so rather than just a regular, HTML or XML or JSON view, they can build inspectors that are specific to their content types. But there's a lot of common things. So like if you want to look at the HTTP headers, there's header views and things like that. If you want to look at it in binary mode, you can look at it in binary mode. Fiddler offers a lot of functionality though. So for instance, this is a response that's using gzip. So they're trying to reduce the size of this response by using gzip, and so we can actually go over and we can remove that. So originally it was 491 bytes, and we saved 3.3 bytes, but as a consequence, we effectively made it impossible to see, right? Well, we can use the transformer to remove that encoding and then look at it, and now boom, it's back in its plain text format. So if you're trying to use something like a Wireshark or a Netmon or things like that, sometimes these encodings that are used by the web platform make it somewhat difficult to do that. And Fiddler makes it super easy. And so you can see right now, for whatever reason, I've got some Camtasia Studio that's trying to make a background network request. And so, hey, I just found out that Camtasia is running some sort of service inside my service host to update itself, which I'm not real happy about. I'll have to go nuke that later. But for a privacy security point of view, this is something that people are interested in. But if I go open a browser, I'll pick Chrome just for no particular reason, and I open progress.com, I'm going to, go see progress.com over in my browser, and in the background, I'm going to see all of the network requests that are getting made, right? And so I see the request that's actually going out to Progress, but I also see all the random background things that Chrome is trying to do. And so, for instance, it's trying to figure out whether I'm on a network that has a DNS server that lies, and it's returning these bogus results for these fake host names. And of course, I chose progress.com's www. There we go. So www.progress.com. Hey, look, you guys are using HTTPS. That's totally awesome. I can select my traffic and see statistics about it. I can see, hey, the majority of things on here are PNG graphics. If I go and look at those PNG graphics, I can do so with Fiddler. So I've got this thing here, which is an image that probably should be a JPEG, but it's a PNG file. It's 686,000 bytes, and I can see that I've actually got a bunch of Adobe metadata shoved in here. So the guys that optimize these graphics for web didn't actually strip out the Adobe editing metadata, and so they could do that and save some bytes. Fiddler has good integration with other tools, so I can do things like I can run this ping distill tool, which will go and parse this PNG file and drop all of the information out of it that's not needed. So these comments here are part of the Adobe metadata, and it's going to decompress and then recompress this file. And so the original file was 102K. If you actually remove the junk that isn't necessary and recompress it, you can get it down to 93K. And so that's one scenario for how you can use Fiddler to optimize your sites. And certainly you can do that. You could build an application atop Fiddler core that would just do this automatically. Fiddler has a pretty extensive plugin model, not just the tabs. So for instance, I wrote a plugin called Show Image Bloat. And what Show Image Bloat does is it provides a visualization of which images should be optimized. And so if we go to www.progress.com, we'll use IE this time. But it doesn't matter. You can use any browser. What Fiddler is going to do is it's going to go rewrite any image that has bloat in it, and it's going to show a brick wall representing the percentage of the bloat in that image. And so we've got this thing here that's a 1226 byte PNG file, and 921 bytes of that is 75% of it is actually just Adobe editing metadata. And so as we click through these graphics, we can actually find opportunities. So like company logos, for some reason, tend to be hugely bloated. And so you see, hey, look, there's all these graphics that could stand optimization. And this is something that is in some ways kind of a joke feature, but at the same time, if you're a graphic designer and you don't know a whole ton about image optimization, but you heard that you need to make the graphics smaller, this is a really quick way to go discover, hey, which of the graphics on my page are suffering from this problem. And you don't have to know much about image optimization. All you have to know is, hey, there's this plugin out there, and I can install this plugin, and this plugin is going to go effectively point out my mistakes to me. And so, for instance, the Microsoft Surface page, we have these files here, and these are actually JPEGs, I think. They have these 27K JPEGs, and 20K of it is Adobe editing metadata and thumbnails. And first, they basically just failed to optimize this graphic when they saved it to the web. And within Fiddler, you can see that what Fiddler does is it basically shows the asset in both its optimized and its unoptimized form. And so you can find effectively these guys were the original assets, the ones with the strike-through line, that have just failed to be optimized. And so, for instance, we've got 3.7K of Adobe image metadata here. There's a 7K thumbnail inside this 27K image, right? Well, a browser's never going to show a thumbnail, but it's in there anyway because the guy that built this graphic failed to save for web. And so, that's just kind of a taste of the scenarios of things that you can do with Fiddler. But, the key point around this product in general is that anything that you can do with Fiddler, you can do with Fiddler Core. And so if there's a scenario where you've got web-related things that are impacting your product, you can use Fiddler Core to make those better. One example of this is there's a tool called Fiddler Cap, and what Fiddler Cap is it's designed for non-technical users to get captures of problems. And so the Zune team at Microsoft, the Hotmail team, the Facebook support team, basically will point users to this product and say, hey, in order to reproduce your scenario, please go run this thing. And it's simple as you press Start Capture, you do whatever's broken, you click Stop Capture, and then you click Save, and we get a file that we can look at. Well, for instance, there's a team at IBM that makes a product, some sort of web service product, and they recently approached us to bundle this Fiddler Cap thing in with their code so that they don't even have to have their users download things. They can just, say, hey, go start this Fiddler Cap thing and do whatever's broken. Well, that's kind of the lightweight way of doing this, but if they really wanted a great situation, what they would do is they would build an application atop Fiddler Core that was just integrated with what they have, so that instead of a separate user-based application, there's just a checkbox that says send debug info, and when that checkbox is checked, it spins up Fiddler Core, collects all the traffic, and sends it to their back end over a secure channel with no interaction with the user. And so those are the sorts of scenarios that you can use for Fiddler Core.
The whole module. And you have a possible machine, right?
Generally speaking, this is the way to think about Fiddler versus Fiddler Core. Orange is the code stuff that the code that effectively you as a user are writing. Orange is rather the code that I've written. Everything else is yours. I reversed the colors in this graphic, which is very confusing. But basically, you can write extensions for Fiddler. You can write inspectors. You can write Fiddler extensions. You can write Fiddler script. You can script it using this tool called exec action, which is kind of a lightweight automation tool. But for a lot of people, what they really want to do is they just want to integrate Fiddler Core within their app, and that's what you can do, as you see in this chart. Programming is super easy. I don't know if you guys are .NET programmers, but basically you just call startup, you pass in the port you want to use, or 0 if you don't want to specify it, and then you get event handlers. So before response, basically I want you to write the response code and the URL to the console, and then when I'm done collecting web traffic later, I call shutdown. And so programming and collecting web traffic is literally that simple. Our overall strategy is we're trying to support Fiddler by selling Fiddler Core. So almost everything we do to improve Fiddler Core improves Fiddler as well. So when we improve scalability or performance or the functionality or the feature set or the programmability model, all of those things improve Fiddler itself. We're supporting Fiddler itself for the public community, and that's one of the things that when somebody reports a bug in Fiddler, if that bug is in Fiddler Core, we go and fix it in Fiddler Core, and that's something that improves the value of the product to the Fiddler Core customers as well. And so there's a synergy between these two platforms. We're trying to broaden the scope. and bring Fiddler to both Linux and OS X. It's going pretty well on Linux. OS X, as I've mentioned 3 times so far, is needing some more work. We're trying to find partners to integrate with Fiddler, and so there's a company, for instance, called GeoEdge that offers a global proxy service so that you can test your websites and applications from a different country. They have a plugin for Fiddler that's bundled with Fiddler. So in Fiddler, there's a menu that says, hey, I want all my traffic to go through China. And it'll go find a proxy server in China, route all your traffic through it, and show it to you as if it had come from China. So the IP address that your web server saw was in China. And so if you're using IP-based targeting, it's there. And so that's a partnership we've done with them. They kick us like 15% of their license cost as a part of that. Trying to use Fiddler as a showcase for our products. So, for instance, there's a PDF inspector in Fiddler that's just the rad PDF viewer from Telerik, and it just shows off, hey, look, you can really, in 10 lines of code, write a program that shows PDF files, and this is a Fiddler extension. And then the last thing, which is really not on this slide, is we're trying to bring more value to Progress's offerings as a whole with Fiddler and Fiddlercore. And so that's kind of part of the reason for the call here is we're trying to get the opportunity to work with other teams in Progress to brainstorm ways in which we can use Fiddlercore to improve the features or support experience of folks that are using our products. Competitors, lots of in-browser developer tools are free. For some of the things that people want to do, they only really ever need in-browser developer tools. They don't need to debug cross-browser because they only care about one, and things like that. There's an OS X version of a tool called Charles Proxy, which is guys in New Zealand, I think. He charges $50 a copy. It's fine. It doesn't have anywhere near the extensive feature set of Fiddler, but it runs very nicely on Mac because it's written in Java rather than .NET. There's a security product called Burp Proxy. It's $300 a year. There's a Windows product called HP Watch that's $475 a year. And there's a whole gamut of effectively cheap or free tools for Chrome that offer things like web service testing. It's not automated. You do things directly within a tab in Chrome. It only works in Chrome and so forth. But effectively, the low end is perpetually under attack. And that kind of goes back to trying to develop Fiddler as the standard tool that everyone's familiar with, because a lot of these tools have market share of, oh, there's 10,000 users using it or 20,000 users using it, but nothing can approach the scope and scale that we have with Fiddler. We really want to get to doing an OS X version. We're just trying to figure out kind of the business market for that. And as I alluded to earlier, and I think Dan will probably talk about in a few minutes, we're trying to expand the licensing model for Fiddlercore. There's a lot of people that would like to use Fiddlercore that are not prepared to pony up the licensing fees that we were charging previously, and so we're going to try and offer a new model for that. And then the last point to be made, and certainly if you guys are using Fiddler or would like to do more with Fiddler, I wrote a book about Fiddler. It's like 300-something pages. It covers every feature of the tool. The second edition is actually coming out next week, and so it's going to be updated. The old version was 2.5 years old now, and I've done a lot of work on Fiddler since joining Telerik, and so the second edition will be coming out. Fiddler itself, we're going to do a major release, the 2.5 or 4.5 release is going to be coming out in the next few weeks, and that's going to be roughly in parallel with the book. And so that's kind of my quick overview of Fiddler, and I'm going to have some Q&A, and Dan is going to talk a bit more about the things that he'd like to on the Fiddler and Fiddlercore market.
Perfect. So yeah, this is a great opportunity for kind of a technical Q&A before we get into just 5-10 minutes on the business side of things. So we'll open it up to you guys.
So I'd just like to confirm, I think what I've heard you saying is that one of the use cases for Fiddler could potentially be to run regression testing on an application, since you have this capture and record.
Absolutely, and so let me show actually one scenario that's kind of fun with that. There's a feature in Fiddler called Verify. Yeah. So if I go and open, what is it? I've got a file. Fiddler versions. And so this is the Fiddler version check web service. I can actually select things that have run before and just hit V. And what it's going to do is it's going to go verify those. And what I mean by that is it's going to go make the exact same HTTP request, and if it changed in any way, it'll paint the new response in red. Whereas if it's identical, it'll paint it in green. And so if you've got a scenario where you literally want to see, did anything at all change in this scenario? I sent exactly the same traffic. Did the response change by even a single byte? You can use that verify feature. But you can also do that in an automated way. And so you could build a test harness atop Fiddler core that does the same functionality. And instead of doing red and green and things like that, it would file a bug inside your internal bug tracking system and attach a traffic capture and things like that. And so yes, you could do regression testing against the HTTP content. Now, to be clear, this is around the network traffic. If you're trying to say like, hey, previously we had a JavaScript bug where if you clicked on this button, the right dialog box didn't pop up. For that sort of thing, you want to use something like Test Studio's functional tests. Test Studio functional tests does DOM-based interactions.
Okay.
So, but the feature you said that where it checks and compares the output, puts the color, that's a part of the free debugger, right? That's not a part of code.
Yes. So the way to think about this is Fiddler core is just the proxy engine. And so if you want to do anything beyond capturing traffic, modifying traffic, and saving and loading capture files, that's code that you either have to write or you have to use Fiddler for. We don't provide a lot of functionality on top of Fiddler core itself. Basically, it's kind of an assemble your own thing. And one of the things that we've considered is there's a set of scenarios that are common among people that want to build applications atop Fiddler core. So one of the scenarios is I want to build effectively a demo in a box. I want to take my entire website offline into an executable and then be able to run that executable, and as the user browses, the executable supplies all of the responses. And so the scenario is I'm a web startup and I want to be able to demo my product without any network connection at all. And so that's a scenario we've heard from several Fiddler core customers. And the problem is today they have to write their own code to do that. And that code isn't super complicated. It's a few hundred lines, but they have to do it. And so one of the things we've considered is whether or not we should actually be building a slate of products atop Fiddler core ourselves that offer that level of functionality. And there's some advantages there in that it would potentially be more valuable to the customer because they wouldn't have to have a development team. And we would have more confidence that the code was being written correctly and things like that. And so we've looked at that a little bit. But yes, generally, most of the features that I'm showing off, things like image optimization and things like comparing requests and responses and so forth, are all part of the Fiddler product, the GUI product.
All right. Any other questions, guys? Have you kind of thought through any other scenarios that might be useful for Fiddler? And actually, Eric, I wanted to ask about the book. Is that a book that we are able to provide to this group?
Yeah, I mean, so if you send me email, I will get you a copy of the book. And that's, sorry, I actually meant to explicitly say that, got distracted. Yeah, if you're using Fiddler or just want to know more about it, just shoot me mail and I'll send you off a PDF of the book. It's got 300 and something pages, 350, I think. But, it's obviously searchable and it's well scoped. So if you just want to know more about, inspectors or the programming model or whatever, you can just read those chapters. So yeah, it's by far the best way to learn about Fiddler. It's fair to say that if you read the entire book about Fiddler, you will know more about it than I do. And I mean that in seriousness, in that I perpetually forget things that Fiddler can do. I have to go back and actually look at the book because the book is really a combination of documentation and specification of what Fiddler does. And so it's a great reference.